So did you get the call from the candidate, let's put it this way?
You talking about Jerry Hutch?
I think I am.
No, but I'm living in hope.
Yeah.
You know, I've invited him on, I've asked him to come on, and I'm living in hope. I always live in hope.
Yeah.
I'm more positive than negative. You know,
Yeah.
glasses always half full. So in actual fact, I would say to the listeners, just in case we do get an opportunity to have Jerry Hutch in to interview him, why don't you start sending some questions in and we can put some of those questions to him, because I'm sure we're not the only ones who have questions for him. I'm sure our regular listeners have loads of questions. So we do have an email, which should be actually, I wonder, for Christmas, would you guys tattoo it across my head so you could remember it?
You'd have to tattoo it on my head so you
I
could
could
read
tattoo it on your head so I can read it.
That would make more sense.
It's crimeworldpod@gmail.com, and you know yourselves to put into the DMs or to, you know, we've loads of social media there that Claude is monitoring. So put your questions in, and, you know, if we get to ask them, we get to ask them. If we don't, we don't.
So what a way to seg into Daniel Kinahan, because he can also send in a question,
He can.
if he so wishes.
Daniel Kinahan is, you see this house, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I could tell you exactly every corner of that house because I have been crawling around that Coldwater Lakes for years.
And above it, because we're talking
And
obviously
above
about, we're talking about a house in Coldwater Lakes in Saggart that has gone up for, it's been listed for auction.
By the Criminal Assets Bureau are selling
Assets
it.
Bureau. They put it up at a minimum price of 550,000. It was a house that the court determined was effectively owned by Daniel Kinahan. But I suppose even beyond the house itself, it unravelled a lot of people's lives, I suppose, ultimately when it came to court.
It's a really interesting story, this house. Now, I just can't find it. It's number 10 Coldwater Lakes,
yeah.
is it?
Yeah, it is,
number
yeah.
10. See, that again is branded into my brain.
Yeah.
Coldwater Lakes, let's start with. It's a housing estate, very private and exclusive in Saggart.
Yeah.
Which was built by the Mansfields. And it was kind of the elite of the estates built out around City West. It's built around a lake, a kind of what was or is a golf course, I think was a golf course, that was designed by Christy O'Connor Jr.
Yeah.
Okay. And in payment for the designing of that house, he was actually listed as an owner of one of those houses. I don't think he ever lived in it, though.
No.
I think that Jim Mansfield Jr.'s mother lived in that house.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, the Mansfields built it, and it was really a playground for the rich and famous. These are very exclusive houses in their own grounds, in this sort of private gated complex.
Yeah.
And the grounds, which would be this golf course thing, which isn't in use, I presume maybe the residents have access to use it, are all sort of part of their gardens.
Yeah.
One part of Coldwater Lakes, the premises of Fat Andy Connors now, where his wife Nan Connors resides, sort of floods down to the edge of it.
Yeah.
So he has this land, and that's there's a kind of a road, and then there's the front of some of these Coldwater Lakes houses, and it goes around a corner. Number 10 was one of the jewels in the crown, it has to be said. Number 9 was once the home of Jimmy Mansfield Jr.
Yeah.
But he sold it to an old friend of the Sunday World. Jim Gallagher used to write about Christina Gallagher. So the visionary.
Yeah, she ran an organisation called the House of Prayer, very controversial organisation. She claimed to have a kind of a direct line to Jesus, basically. And she
got that stigmata, didn't she, in her hands?
She had
and everything.
A few things like that.
But a few bits like that going on.
A few of that sort of things.
Yeah. But she'd made an awful lot of money.
Huge amount of money. Yeah. And in America, with these sort of apocalyptic visions, and in order to save your soul, you had to buy bits of her carpet and various things like this. Very controversial because there was a lot of people who... at least they claimed that they had handed over their life savings to her, and obviously the Catholic Church had a couple of priests who were with her. That was very controversial as well. So she was living in there. Jim Mansfield Jr.
She bought his house from him.
She bought his house, yeah.
And that was number 9. And it was like surrounded with this fencing that looked impenetrable completely and utterly. Like it was one of the biggest and most secure houses. Another of the properties there was occupied by PJ Mansfield and his previous wife, Andrea
Roach,
thank you.
Yeah.
That name would have come off my tongue easier some years ago. Wonder where she is. But she was the former Miss Ireland that he married, and the first relationship was with her. Who else lived there? Couple of other interesting characters lived there over the years, and obviously totally ordinary people.
Yeah.
Successful business people. The houses, anyway, seemed to pass, some of them between the hands of some of the Mansfields, moved in and out of them. Number 10 was where Jim Mansfield Jr.'s mother was living, Anne Mansfield, who was the wife of the late Jim Mansfield Senior.
Yeah.
He was living in Saggart House, which is kind of across the road. It's actually located beside City West. It's another mansion, basically, in its own grounds with an island and all the rest of it. But that was the Mansfield family home. And he was living in there. And his wife, estranged presumably at the time, was in number 10.
Yeah.
So we know what happened with the Mansfields. Mansfield Senior encouraged the investment of dirty money. He washed it clean for many criminals over many, many years. His son, as his health ailed and as his business went into receivership, sort of took over and tried to salvage what he could. And he would have been mixing with, I presume you could call them, far more dangerous criminals than his father ever did, or certainly the father seemed to know how to mix the business and how to,
I think it was easier for Senior, if you want to say, because he was a property investor at a time where it was almost impossible not to make a lot of money. So once you had money swirling around, there was loads more money to be gotten. And, if
everyone was kept happy.
Yeah, so exactly. And there was always money to be borrowed from the bank and future earnings to be counted on. So as long as that had gone on, he could have kept getting in this cash and probably kept paying it out with dividends because the property market was accelerating so rapidly. But unfortunately, these things don't go on forever, unfortunately for the Mansfields. And when the property crash occurred, all of that notional money that was going to be repaid wasn't there. And so everybody was looking for cold, hard cash, including the banks, but probably more concerningly, including the criminals that had invested money and had been told, you give me whatever amount of money and you'll end up with a property and cleanly in your name or in a family member's name. So obviously, Jim Senior passed away.
The Bank of Scotland came calling first of all for more than 300,000 in debt, and
300,000 more than
million.
Sorry, yeah,
squillion. What did I say?
300,000. I was thinking
300,000. Yeah, that would have been pocket money.
Yeah,
more than 300 million in debt. They came looking for. They went into receivership, and they lost. Mansfield lost pretty much everything except the family home. At the same time that had happened, his son, Jim Jr., had accepted a suitcase full of cash delivered to his property by Thomas Bomber Kavanagh and Daniel Kinahan on the basis that they had identified a number of properties and they were to be transferred, the ownership was to be transferred into them. But between getting the cash and forgetting to transfer the ownership or not doing it quick enough, those houses that were earmarked for them also flooded into the receivership. So they were left with a massive problem.
Yeah.
Mansfield Jr. had taken the cash, but he had nothing to give back. So he came up with a deal.
Yeah.
And he decided to give Daniel Kinahan a house in Coldwater Lakes as part of the payment, as part of the debt he owed back. And I think I was saying this on the show, it was obviously easier for him to turf his mother out of her house than to face the music with Daniel Kinahan. So that's what he did.
Yeah.
He turfed Anne Mansfield, his mother, out of number 10, moved her into Tasaggart House, where she had her own quarters, and she's still living there, as far as I am aware. And the house number 10 went to Daniel Kinahan. Now, the first kind of, I suppose, sniff we had that the Kinahans had something to do with number 10, Coldwater Lakes, was when there was a search on the property. You're going to have to help me with the year.
Well, the year...
2014?
Yeah, I think it was 2014 or 2015.
Yeah. There was a search of that property along with other properties to do with an investigation into the Mansfields, wealth.
Yeah.
And Matthew Macklin was discovered to be staying in the property.
So when the police raided the home, Matthew Macklin was there. At this point, Matthew Macklin and Daniel Kinahan were self-described best friends, weren't they? They were running MGM at that time. Matthew,
which was the boxing gym
which
in Marbella.
The match in Marbella that would eventually morph into MTK. But at that stage, Matthew Macklin was, one of the best known boxers in Ireland and in the UK, very highly respected. But he was gone into business with Daniel Kinahan. So the home was raided and Matthew Macklin was there. Police described him as being polite but didn't say anything. But they also found other evidence that Daniel Kinahan had been there, and that included an old passport in his name. There was also a Ryanair boarding pass in Christy Jr.'s name, Daniel's brother. So the links were established at that point. There was for all intents and purposes, it was clear that the Kinahans brothers were there when they were in Ireland, or at least there for some of the time they were in Ireland, and had control of the property anyway.
At which point I started to sort of crawl around Coldwater Lakes, as I said to you. Because obviously it was a property that the Kinahans were staying in when they were in town, and it would have been interesting to photographically link them with it, or any other members of the cartel.
Yeah, and of course at that stage we had the Mansfields, who, in the eyes of the public, while there might have been a sense that underneath the exterior there might have been something going on, but certainly in the minds of the public, they were businessmen who maybe had fallen on hard times, but the idea that they could be publicly linked to organised crime, they were having absolutely none of it. And there was many, when asked about it, Jim Mansfield Sr., before he became ill, had denied all knowledge of organised crime. In fact, Jim Mansfield Sr. had often hung around with and associated with paramilitaries and organised crime figures, and had that long association. So the idea at that point that, Jim Mansfield Jr., known primarily as a socialite, would have had the Kinahans staying in a house that he had been registered as the owner, it would have been incredible. Now we're used to it, but at that stage it would have been a big story. Absolutely.
And because I suppose the grounds of it were private, it was difficult to watch the house, of course. So there was a variety of ways and means that myself and a couple of photographers used to use.
Yeah.
There was dogs brought. There was all sorts, as we could, keep an eye, see was there any cars, that kind of thing. And it did go on. It was intriguing. Really, the idea of that link at the time.
Yeah.
That solid link between Mansfields and the Kinahans. And on it went. So the second time that there was a search on that property was in 2019, when officers found that Anthony Fitzpatrick, who was then a manager at MTK, the boxing firm, was working remotely from the house, and he had moved back from Spain, and he was living there. He was actually somebody who had met with and been associated with the Kinahans since way back when he was in Tala. He had grown up in Tala, and Christy Kinahan Sr. had a house in Tala.
Yeah, he did.
When he was much younger, when the boys were children. And he used to have the boys stay with him a lot in this house in Tala. And that's where the links with Fitzpatrick had come from. But he was basically living there and running MTK essentially from it, or certainly carrying out his management role there. So a lot of the information around this Coldwater Lakes and what happened in this area, and I suppose behind those electronic gates of that mansion, came largely from Martin Byrne, who was the former security guard, head of security for Jim Mansfield Sr., who ended up going state witness and going on the witness protection program after an incident that happened to him when he was kidnapped and held by Desi O'Hare and Declan Wacker Duffy and others. He gave evidence in court, kind of, he spilled out a lot of the secrets, really, didn't he?
He did.
About the Mansfields' connections to organised crime.
He did, and remember the cab opened an investigation. The police, the Gardaí involved, obviously, and it was a big investigation, and it was hugely resisted by Jim Mansfield Jr. He put up staunch resistance, both legally and also in the media. So he did a number of interviews where he claimed he was being wrongly targeted, victimised, various terms like that. He also resisted each step of it legally, putting, wrote to politicians, didn't he write to? Mm-hmm. Can't remember if it was the Taoiseach or the Taoiseach, Enda Kenny at the time, saying how his family were being unfairly targeted, being associated with these allegations of criminality that didn't stack up. And there was an agenda there from the police. He did an interview with a big newspaper talking about conspiracies, basically. So it was. That was then. Mm-hmm. And of course, when it finally did come to court after Jim Mansfield Jr. had been convicted of perverting the course of justice in relation to the case you just spoke about, where Martin Byrne was beaten up. There was CCTV evidence that went missing. Jim Mansfield Jr. was ultimately convicted of it and given I think it was a 18-month sentence at the time. After that, the cab case came to court. I remember you preparing for it, thinking... It
was in 2022, and it first was mentioned in Cork.
Yeah.
And I had just heard, for some reason, it was opened, the case in court. And because the cab cases come and they're in camera for the first section, basically, until they move to the next section. And then they can be, reported upon. But it was, for some reason, it was down in Cork. And I went down, I remember it absolutely lashing rain and not having a coat, let alone anything else with me, and arriving into the court absolutely sodden wet, thinking, is this tip correct or not? And Shelley Horan, senior counsel, stood up and very elegantly and quietly read into court that this house was believed to belong and to be given sort of as currency to Daniel Kinahan from Jim Mansfield Jr.
Yeah.
And at that moment, the house of cards totally collapsed.
Yeah, I mean,
Mansfield.
There was talk of not just the 4.5 million, but being delivered in 2 suitcases full by, was it Bomber Kavanagh as well as Daniel?
It was the investment from the two of them, basically. Yeah. It was their cash, and these suitcases had been delivered to Saggart House, to the door of Saggart House.
Yeah.
Suitcases of cash. I was trying to imagine.
Yeah, how big
is the suitcase?
I don't know.
Like, how much money have you ever had cash-wise?
I don't think I've ever had more than a couple of grand.
A couple of grand, yeah, a few grand or whatever if you owe somebody or you're paying for something in cash. Like, that's a thick envelope, right? But...
Well, I mean, you vacuum pack it and all that.
Like, are you going to fit it into the Ryanair cabin bag?
I don't know. I doubt I'll ever know because I can't see any 4.5.
And we've kind of missed the boat because people don't use cash anymore.
No, they don't.
Knowing that.
So all of that resistance, all of that, we're going to fight this to the death, and they were suing people back. Obviously CAB had investigated them and brought proceedings, but they'd launched cases against the state and against, of course, the Sunday World for reporting on any of this stuff. But when it came to court after his conviction, they didn't resist it. Jim Mansfield Jr. didn't put up any resistance. He didn't contest it. The state described how they'd made various attempts to get in touch with Daniel Kinahan, who was obviously in Dubai at this stage. They'd sent a number of emails to legal representatives, and he didn't contest it, probably unsurprisingly. Bomber Kavanagh, I think, was served with some sort of papers while he was in a UK jail in connection with the house. He didn't contest it. So ultimately, after all of that palaver, the case actually ended really, really quickly, if you remember. The judge, in summing it up, described the house, he said, this is an attempted repayment of funds to the Kinahan organised crime group that wasn't properly effected. And it was really simply and clearly laid out exactly what had happened. And yeah, it's the house is taken over. Sometimes there's other procedures to go through, isn't there, when CAB take houses? They don't seem to go straight on the market for whatever reason. I don't know if they have to sign things over on property registers or clean them up, but it's gone on the market anyway this week.
550,000. Which is obviously just, I mean, if you look up Coldwater Lakes, I think I sent you the other evening. There's 2 other houses actually for sale at the moment in Coldwater Lakes. They're all different sizes. Different square footage, different specs. One of them is currently sale agreed and having gone on the market for 750,000. The other one then, which is currently for sale, is number 25 Coldwater Lakes, Sagar. Now it's a 4-bed, 6-bath, and it's for sale for 1.595 asking price.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's described that Daniel Kinahan's house as being in need of some renovations. Probably hasn't been lived in for a while.
Now, we talk about people buying. I would say anybody that's looking for a bargain on this one, Daniel Kinahan ain't coming back to claim that house. He's never going to knock on your front door. It is in behind gated. It might sound a little bit daunting to purchase Daniel Kinahan's house, which has been taken off him by the CAB. I don't think Daniel Kinahan ever had any particular fancy for that house. He never really had any connection with it. It was given as a bit of currency. There's other properties in Dublin he'd be more sentimentally attached to than that one. So I'm just saying, if you're looking for a bargain, I would think that is quite an interesting purchase. Maybe we should go and see it.
Maybe we should. I mean,
would we be allowed?
I suppose you would.
Yeah.
Put on your hat.
Respectable. Put on my baseball cap. Would that do it?
That's your cunning disguise.
Yeah.
That you used to.
I actually do use that.
I know.
And sometimes it does work.
Yeah.
And then sometimes people just go, why are you wearing that? Anyway, look, it is... it's just another little bit of this.
It's another little bit of the story that's unwound, and it's, you look back on it and it's really normal. That house is up for sale. But if you think of the history and the denials and the battles over it, it ends in a whimper, not a bang, to an extent.
I mean, Mansfield was suing the Sunday World over a lot of stuff I wrote in connection with dirty money dealings and all the rest of it. And I do remember that moment in court just thinking, okay, he had been convicted of attempting to pervert the course of justice. He'd been found not guilty of kidnap, but nonetheless he'd been convicted, he was in jail. So that isn't particularly good.
No.
But that moment when he was directly linked in evidence in court with Daniel Kinahan, I thought, this is it. He can no longer deny it. And shortly afterwards, we received a letter from a solicitor representing him asking, could he drop the case against us? Would we mind if he dropped the case? And I think we looked for a small donation to be given to charity because our costs had been pretty big up to that point. But, obviously, yes, we're happy for you to drop the case. But it was such a climb down with the level of sort of confidence.
Yeah.
Sometimes like I remember particularly with Jim Mansfield, particularly with that Jim Mansfield Jr., and I had approached him a number of times and, I had put things to him and he was always so definitive in his saying, you're ridiculous, you have no idea what you're talking about, you're a fantasist. He didn't quite say that to me, but he was almost saying that. He'd laugh, if I ever put any of these suggestions to him. He was so confident. He'd follow it up with a solicitor's letter like, if you dare suggest this. And you'd sometimes wonder, have I got this wrong? I mean, your stomach would kind of lurch a bit and you'd go, I know this is correct, don't I? Because he was so adamant that it wasn't.
Yeah.
So adamant. And then...
Yeah, there's some people like that, isn't there? Sometimes, and I'm not speaking about Jim Mansfield Jr., but some of the fraudster guys, I mean, they're so confident when they ring you up to tell you this isn't true and that's not true. And, then when you get to court and you see them plead guilty and just go, it's so amazing. Like, why did he even bother with those sort of full-fronted denials? But yeah, it's a funny part of human psychology.
Yeah. Anyway, it's nice to have legal cases dropped.
It is.
The old friends again. Right. So, Godspeed whoever buys that
Yes.
property.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Niall.
Thanks.